They tried to give me synthetic ways to stimulate my appetite, so that didn't work. So obviously I did the old-fashioned cannabis. Children's hospitals don't look too fond upon cannabis, and so I had to take it within myself to put myself first, and so I had to sneak in edibles, which then, led to 3 o'clock in the morning. There I am with my IV pole, stumbling around, finding my way into the kitchen in the children's hospital, just like, who's going to make me a grilled cheese?
Good, baby. Oh man, I've had the same intro every episode, but I got to change it now because there's no Nick. So I'm just gonna go off the improv.
All right. Off the dome.
Yep, that's how we do it.
Yes, whenever you guys are ready.
What's up, guys, and welcome to episode 9 of the Spread Good podcast. My name is Brodi Nicholas, and as you could tell, there's no Nick to be found because today Nick had his baby boy. So excited for Nick, Shell, and the rest of the family. We got another Spread Good baby, part of the family. In other news, got a great guest today, Weston Lord, 4-time cancer warrior, philanthropist, jiu-jitsu connoisseur, so many things. This is the first time we've actually met in person.
First time, yeah.
Welcome, brother.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
Okay, where I'm from. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm definitely not from the States. So I grew up, I was born and raised in England. I tell most people Fulham and London, that's where I spent a lot of my time, but I really kind of did most of my growing up 45 minutes south of London, a place called Cramley. So if you've ever seen like the Harry Potter movies, it's in this county called Surrey, where there's probably more grandmas than there are people your age, but it's a sweet, kind of slow town, and grateful to be growing up there.
Very cool, very cool. And what actually brought you to the States?
So I feel like, as every foreigner does, they have a dream of being an actor and being on the big screens, and I think that's how I originally started. Actually, so my dad's American, so I had the American passport, which definitely made it a lot easier, but I always knew, probably about like 12 or 13 years old, that I was going to be out in the States. And so I kind of finagled it where I was going to study at college. So I started off at UCSB. Not as much acting there as I would have liked, but I eventually transferred to my dream school, which was USC. And so I had a really nice combination of both business and then the acting, the short films and stuff like that. And so that's where the dream started out. It definitely shifted. But yeah, it was really nice.
Okay, and are you still acting today?
How I like to kind of talk about it is, well, the acting that I use or the acting skills that I developed and stuff are all kind of very applicable still today in kind of pitching and presenting and entrepreneurship. The beautiful part of that entrepreneurship side is I get to be myself. And I think, you spend a lot of time beginning to like yourself. And then I feel like, especially some of the acting, and then I was living in Los Angeles and realizing that in order to really succeed, I would have to kind of start changing who I was. And I was like, I put so much time into like starting to like myself that to really succeed in that area just didn't really align much with my values.
No, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We actually talked about that on an episode a few episodes back with our guy Walter. He's here behind the camera right now. But yeah, Hollywood, it's a beautiful place, but authenticity is a bit hard to find sometimes.
Definitely.
So the self-awareness you had to stay true to yourself and find your path is pretty cool. Pretty cool.
That. I also had jiu-jitsu where I had people beating the crap out of me. So I was just like, that kept me on the straight and narrow. Whenever I felt I was too big for my boots, I would go back in the class and be like, all right, this is where I'm at right now.
So have you done that for quite a while as well?
Yeah, so I started in about 2018. I imagine we'll get into this a little bit more. It was actually like 4 months after my first bone marrow transplant.
Wow.
And I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody that I had cancer or anything like that. It was just like really skinny. And that was one of the greatest gifts I could give myself. And there's so many beautiful things that come from jiu-jitsu, but, like we talked about, that authenticity, it's kind of tough to be like, beat your chest and say you're this or that, because we're going to find out quite quickly what you're made of. But really the peace from mind that I got from it was just unlike anything I'd really experienced. And you don't necessarily have to have cancer to really kind of overthink your life, and to find something that gives you a break from, all the intrusive thoughts is just so important. And for some reason, my secret sauce was having people try to strangle me and break my bones where I wouldn't think about anything. And it's just such a love and a passion. And I haven't been able to do it for a couple of months because of some medication stuff. So I actually just started up again last week, and I've missed it. I got spaghettied. I mean, I got the work put on me, but it just reignited that love and passion. And yeah, if anybody wants to try it, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I've done it before as well, and it's a
humbling.
rush. It's very humbling. I wrestled in high school.
Oh, you probably had a better start than I did.
Yeah, but still, some of those guys have been in there quite a while. Guys and girls have been there quite a while, and again, humbling and fun. Do you watch MMA?
Oh yeah, I love
cool.
UFC. Yeah, I think that once I started getting to jiu-jitsu, so I actually played a lot of sports growing up, and when I went to UCSB, I played rugby at college, and that was really fun. And I always kind of watched UFC, but once I kind of found jiu-jitsu, UFC became even more interesting because everybody's like, I just want to see them stand up and swing, and I'm like, I love that, but I also love the struggle cuddles.
Yeah,
I also love it when it goes to the floor, and the way they combined it together. I was just like, this is amazing. I find it tough to watch baseball. I'm like, all right, bring it back to two people just trying to hit each other.
Absolutely, yeah. I actually was at UFC London a few months back. Yeah,
that's awesome.
It was a good time.
Was that with
Usman?
Okay.
And Leon?
Yeah. That's a wild one. Yeah. That was like a final round, that head kick.
Yeah, that was that was a fight before.
Oh, okay.
So that's what brought
the
trilogy. And that fight, though, if he would have won that fight, he would have tied Anderson Silva.
Oh wow!
For I think it's biggest streak.
Yeah.
But what's so sad about that, losing that match, is he just doesn't have the years to do it again. Even if he won another streak.
Yeah,
I mean, he ended up losing again in London. So we'll see what his next move is. But now that I know you like UFC,
I love it.
It's actually one of the big things I'm into on Saturdays. And I've been to some fights as well.
It's crazy. I've never been to a fight. As much as I love it and I talk about it, and I'm like, I still haven't been to a fight. And I imagine the energy has got to be just next level.
It's next level. I went to UFC Austin last year, and that was my first fight. And I'm really, how do I say this? Like, going to sporting events is fun. I really do enjoy it, but it's not like a big passion of mine.
Yeah.
But like you said, the energy at a UFC fight,
It's
we were
just
in the
different.
nosebleeds. I'm telling you, I couldn't even imagine being ringside, but you feel those walkout songs are like, that's what I live for.
That's
It's like
awesome.
my dream. I just want to walk through that tunnel.
What would be your walkout song?
Oh, Party in the USA, Miley Cyrus. 100%.
That's good. I like that.
What about you?
Oh man, I haven't even given that much thought. And maybe something just I think quite comical, just because they've messed with their heads.
You got to.
Maybe something we'd sing in England. The like what's his name? Volkanovski, like his Down Under, the Australian. I've got to find something British, and maybe just like the
100%.
British national anthem.
That would be
People
good.
like start booing.
Absolutely. Would you? Have you thought of like competing?
So
do you compete?
I've competed a bunch in jiu-jitsu. Actually, funny enough, the last time I competed, I had cancer.
Wow.
So I know, and I didn't even realize it was. The leukemia manifested itself in the skin of my right foot. And I was like, man, I feel more tired than usual, and I just didn't overthink it. And I just got in there. But it's such a funny last tournament too, because I'm always the kind of guy that gives the motivational speeches to my teammates and stuff, because everybody's nervous, just before something like that. And I was freaking nervous. So there I was, gave the motivational speech to all my teammates, and then like 5 minutes later, I was like, I go to the toilet, and I just threw up.
Oh man, that is.
I was just so nervous. I was just like, there's got to be at least one person who's a rock. And I mean, competing is such a good way to just get better, especially with the nerves and the adrenaline. I call it like the donut, like your ability to see everything just slowly gets smaller and smaller. And then you watch it back and you're like, oh, there were so many options in terms of to do stuff.
Right.
And like, I got a couple of wins, and then there was one where I got this triangle in this absolute brick house. And I just burnt my legs completely because I was like, I thought I had it. And then he won on points, and it was the saddest thing ever. It didn't even choke me out or anything. I was just like, I've got nothing left.
Yep.
But, I'm a big believer of doing stuff that's uncomfortable, because those are always the things that you remember. All the things that stick to your head is putting yourself out there, putting you in a position where you look silly, you could fail, but always those uncomfortable situations make you grow further than anything else, really, than the ease and the comfort.
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
The adrenaline gets you excited.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what it is when I watch sports now and the UFC, and I feel it just watching. So being able to compete, that's a whole new level. So
we're definitely going to get back into it, the competing, but it definitely can get too much because you're thinking about it, the week before. But that's a good lesson for life as well, I would say, in terms of fear, the future fears especially, we have a perception of what those fears are going to look like. And then the day happens, and as much as you thought about it, it's still going to be different. So all the energy you spent worrying about something, trying to predict this outcome, it's a self-protection mechanism that your brain tries to do. You're never going to be able to predict it exactly, so you might as well try and enjoy the moment and be present. And maybe it just takes more time to do that. Now I'm thinking about it.
For sure. And what is prep like for jiu-jitsu? Is it like MMA? Are you cutting? Are you...
I feel like jiu-jitsu is a little bit lazier.
Okay.
I mean, because you came from wrestling.
Yeah.
Wrestling's like the hardcore. I mean, you're dropping to, weights that you definitely shouldn't have, and it's not good for your health, but it's going to give you the best advantage. I think jiu-jitsu is a little bit lazier, but it all kind of depends on, what level you're competing at. Because you have the adults, which is, I think, up to the age of 30, and then after. And so I'm still 26, so I'm like fighting these kids who probably some of them have been training since they were like 5 years old, and I'm not cutting. I'd say the biggest real training beforehand is like shark tanks.
Okay.
And that's simply just, you're the one person in the middle, and then you just get fresh guys every, 5, 6, 7 minutes, depending on the tournament and stuff like that. And then just having a good warm-up routine, because so much of the adrenaline comes beforehand that when you start competing, it's like you're either too tired or you're too slow to start. And some guys are just like ready to go.
Yeah, fired up.
Yeah, fired up.
So I know you mentioned in your last tournament you had cancer.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned in your intro, you're a 4-time cancer warrior. How old were you the first time you were diagnosed?
So I was 19, and this was July 7th of 2016.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of what I was up to at 19 years old.
What were you doing?
What was I doing? I was making music.
Oh,
I was,
yeah.
Traveling, making music. And I couldn't imagine what that would be like at that age. We've met a lot of kids that go through it. I've met even a lot of older adults, but 19, not many people at 19. Where were you in life when all this happened?
So I was at my first college. So I was at UCSB. I was preparing for finals week. I actually was also pledging a fraternity.
Okay.
So just the combination of getting ready for finals, getting super tired from pledging, and then I started getting these symptoms. For instance, I was getting like full night body, actually not full, but like waist down body sweats. I was like, that was kind of weird. And then I think one of the biggest ones that really kind of stuck in the back of my head was I was unable to really experience pain. And so I looked at the back of my throat, and it looked like strep, like the white spots, and I just couldn't really feel it. And that really kind of bugged me. And then there was kind of bits of lightheadedness. Actually, now thinking about it, I did actually pass out in the bathroom. That was another sign. And then the kind of accumulation of everything made me nervous enough to go down to the student health center. And then I remember going down to the health center, and they took my blood, and then I could almost see the kind of panic in the student healthcare doctor's eyes. And she was like, you need to go to see a hematologist right now. I mean, we got to order you a taxi, and you got to go straight to downtown to get you to a hematologist, someone who could actually like look at your blood, and essentially was confirming what she already knew. And so with a lot of leukemias, it's the sheer amount of white blood cells in your blood, because they can continue to they replicate the mutated cells. And so, when they did the blood labs, they already told me. So I went into the doctor's office, and there was a nurse, a social worker, and the doctor, and I just knew it was just like something bad. I even knew actually in the taxi ride down, because you can tell by just the demeanor and the facial expressions, and that was not a good feeling. And then because I come from England, I wasn't even able to tell my family straight away because they were all asleep. And then it took a couple of days till I could actually see my family. And it was definitely one of the toughest parts. It's because it's just a shock, I think, to your system, because you see your life and you somewhat have an idea of what you're going to try and do, and then it kind of just gets taken away from you. Well, a lot of like swept under your feet kind of thing, or the mattress gets pulled out. And then it comes back to a big belief of mine. I don't know if you've read the book, like Man's Search for Meaning.
No.
That's my favorite book.
I got to read it.
Oh, it's amazing. And the big theme of it is really, you don't get to choose the cards you're dealt. You don't get to choose the circumstances that happen in your life, but you always get to choose how you react. And as much as I would like to say I was able to control my emotions immediately, that's just not true at all. I'm pretty sure when I was first diagnosed, I had just a meltdown. Rightfully so. I remember just like struggling to breathe, thinking it was a death sentence, giving it a Google. I was like, oh, I got like a 20% chance of living. I was like, God, this isn't good. But then I remember, as days went by, you really got to stop and to think and to begin to, make the most out of it. And that definitely took a little while. But I would say one of the most powerful parts of my treatment and getting to that place is being in a children's hospital, is starting off from Rady's. Because there is definitely a different energy being in a children's hospital than the adult big boys.
True, yeah.
And starting off in that children's hospital was just like, it took a lot of my excuses away, gave a lot of perspective, seeing the kids were getting pretty much some of the exact same chemo regimens I was. And I was like, I'm getting blasted. And I'm like, this kid has just finished it. And then they are just having fun playing. And that power of, again, the story you tell yourself, being in the moment, being present, that was a big inspiration for me going forward. And then also, I saw a lot of the parents of the children was kind of looking at me in a certain way, because I think they saw in a lot of ways what their kid was going to grow up, maybe psychologically, maybe physically. And I like to think that, I handled it pretty well. As much as, and one of the greatest compliments I've gotten was that, like, I handled my treatments with grace. And that was something that I really kind of take to heart, because I tried to, because it's easy to get kind of bogged down, because when your external world's dark, it's very easy to then kind of accumulate that in conjunction with the internal world being dark. And maybe it was because of where I grew up. I think England's naturally a little bit more pessimistic and a little bit more cynical, and so I already had, in some ways, some of the internal world was a little bit dark. And then when the external world was, actually dark, I was like, what am I going to double down and make it double shit? I was like, that doesn't really seem like the way to go right there. And then, I then also maybe getting a glimpse of California. I was like, wow, there's some really good bits out there. And then getting diagnosed and then getting sick, and was realizing, you don't really know how good it is until, you experience that bad. I really do look back, and I feel grateful for my suffering. I'm grateful for the trials and tribulations of my life, because it really has kind of made me into the person I am today, the person I actually quite like. And that's where I talked about earlier, like the acting and stuff, and having the confidence to being like, this is not something I want to do because it doesn't align with my values. And I think that's one of the hardest things as a human being, and especially as a man as well, being your own harshest critic. I'm not doing enough, I'm not being enough. And to begin that relationship of, self-love, and that's really tough. And I don't think I would have experienced it, maybe unless I had like a midlife crisis when I was 50, if it was pretty going that direction. But because of cancer, I was able to really kind of go in and start understanding why I was the way I was, the relationship I had with my parents, the relationship I had with my family. And I definitely try and look for the good in, how I grew.
For sure. And with your family living in London at the time, I know you said, you couldn't call them right away because they were asleep, and then you didn't see them for a couple of days. Like, that must have been the longest 48 hours on both ends, right? Like, how was that first call?
That was tough. I remember really speaking to my mom, and, you just don't want to make your parents feel bad. I think especially, and even though you're 19, you're technically an adult. In some ways, I didn't really feel like a full adult yet. And I felt, bringing them this news was just, it was heartbreaking, because I knew how they were going to react. And it's almost like I didn't want to share it with them, because I didn't want to pass on that trauma in a lot of ways. Because a lot of people sometimes just look at the patient, but it affects the whole family. In some ways more so, because in a lot of ways I'm really grateful that it was me who went through it, because I don't really know how I would feel in that position of hopelessness, of the person you love is sick and there's nothing you can do about it. That in itself is its own really difficult challenge. And I especially saw that, saw that in my whole family. They try to help as much as they can, but there's only an extent. There's only so much money you can buy. There's only so much, hugs you can give. And then at the end of the day, you have to trust that this person's going to fight their hardest, or just show up the best they can. And cancer treatment, that looks like forcing yourself to eat, making laps around the hospital. And in a lot of ways I'm really glad that it was me, because I was like, I know that I got this. And so I just wanted like my family to be like, they got their stuff and we'll get it done.
And With that being said, your family, they traveled here. Do you have siblings as well?
I have 3 sisters.
3 sisters. So did they all come?
Yes, they all came, and but kind of like periodically kind of
Okay.
switched out and stuff like that. I think my older sister was, she was at Cornell at the time. She was at university. And then my 2 younger sisters were in England. Actually, no, sorry. One of my younger sisters was actually doing her last 2 years of school in California. So we're all kind of around.
Okay.
But I think I remember when I first was diagnosed, I definitely wanted, an element of space too. Because like you said, 19 is a tough age. Because it's like you're trying to grow up and you're trying to do things on your own and have that independence, and then it kind of gets taken from you. And I can't imagine every 19-year-old wanting to hang around their family the whole time. But having that love and support and knowing it's there was really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And being in that children's hospital, I'm assuming there wasn't a whole bunch of 19-year-olds in there with you.
I was hanging out a lot with the nurses. I was just I was bothering them at the station at like 2:00 in the morning. I was a bit of a nuisance, I have to say. I was probably wasn't the easiest patient, but I was probably the funnest.
Yeah.
Definitely the funnest. I remember, because I said I was like pledging fraternity and stuff like that, and as you can imagine, going through chemotherapy treatment, eating's a big problem. They tried to give me synthetic ways to stimulate my appetite, so that didn't work. So obviously I did the old-fashioned cannabis. Children's hospitals don't look too fond upon cannabis, and so I had to take it within myself to put myself first, and so I had to sneak in edibles, which then led to 3:00 in the morning. There I am with my IV pole, stumbling around, finding my way into the kitchen in the children's hospital, just like, who's gonna make me a grilled cheese?
I love it. And yeah, with that being said, I've heard a lot of good things about cannabis.
Oh my god!
And
I
so-
don't think I'd be alive today without it.
And so bringing that in, like you said, you kind of just did your own thing while you were taking the hospital protocol. So
Not exactly. Not exactly. I definitely learned a lot of stuff the hard way. There's actually like a terrible story. That's not a good way to preface it. It's a bad decision on my part. I think it was maybe like a week or so into the treatment, so I didn't really need it for the appetite stimulation at that point. But I wanted to feel normally, and I wanted to, again, kind of block out the cancer just for a little bit, get a little bit of a break. And what I got was a complete opposite. I took like a 50 milligram edible. This was again like a week, maybe a little bit less than a week. I took a 50 milligram edible. I remember going to the toilet and starting to walk back, and I was like, damn, I feel kind of lightheaded, and I just completely pass out. And I when I look back, I think it was simply because of just sheer anxiety, hadn't begun to process what had happened to me. And so I was like flat on my back, and I remember the first person to find me. And so I'm like lying on my back, my IV line's torn.
Oh.
And guess who's to find me? My dad. My dad had flown 11 hours.
Oh.
And he just finds the son on the floor, just looking up at the ceiling. And then he was just like, starts screaming for a nurse. And then next thing I know, there's like 15 nurses in there. And I'm getting taken to the intensive care unit. And I was like, I don't want to tell them that it was just me. And I'm just so high. And it took so much. And maybe it was because of my blood, my labs and stuff like that it was so uncomfortable. I don't think I told my dad till a year later. It was so
Wow.
it was so embarrassing.
And what do you
He
say
just
at that
couldn't handle
point?
his weed.
Oh man.
I think my dad says like, I'm glad you didn't tell me then.
That's good. Good time to keep that one in.
Got to keep everybody on their toes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep it interesting. Keep it interesting.
Really interesting. But in terms of the actual holistic, the good parts of it, eating is one of the hardest parts during treatment. I mean, that can literally be the difference in a lot of ways between fighting an infection and not. And there can be there was definitely at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks where I wouldn't eat anything. And for me, I think it was not necessarily creating taste, but I think it was more the imagination of that I was eating, when I was eating food, was that I was always imagining what it would taste like, and then kind of forget, overthinking about the food, and then I would just get something down. And then I've spent definitely over 200 days in hospital total. I've actually lost count at this point. I don't think there's any point counting. But that also gave me a lot of that psychological component too, to really start bringing up and going through parts of myself that I didn't quite understand, or why I did the things I did. What I did when I was sad, what I do when I was angry, and getting to know myself a lot better. And it definitely made the time pass, I'd say, a lot more enjoyable. And listening to music and stuff like that. I did a lot of writing when I was in the hospital. And there's definitely a lot of good parts to it. Definitely shouldn't be high all the time. And then surprisingly, because weed's meant to help with pain, I didn't use it at all when I was in pain.
Really?
Yeah, because it just didn't make me feel good at all.
Okay.
And that's when I had to unfortunately go back to the old pharmaceutical, heavy duty stuff. But very grateful that I had it. Very grateful that I had it. And I imagine in England it maybe be a little bit different. But shout out cannabis.
Yeah. We're looking for sponsors. So.
Yeah, spread good.
Spread good. So did you make any friends other than the nurses while you were inpatient? Again, seeing there's a big age gap with you and a lot of the other patients.
Yeah. There's actually quite a few. Some of the kids. There's one kid going through treatment right now who was treated with me back in 2016. His name's Dylan. You know Dylan as well. Yeah. Great kid. Always the funniest. He was treated, I think, 8 years old to 11 years old back in 2016 when I was diagnosed. And there was another girl called Cassandra, another girl called Susie. There were so many of them. Like I said before, the power that they have of being present was simply one of the most marvelous things I've ever seen. It gave me so much strength, and it got me out of my own head too, just to watch them again, like having fun. And Dylan too, were like swinging by on his we call them the trees, just like getting pushed around the hospital, and he'd be just like hanging down the bottom. There was definitely a part of it that I had to address, because sometimes I felt that I was almost getting too emotionally involved in sometimes their lives. And I remember there was a point where I remember some of the doctors and my mom were worried about me because I was trying to be somebody. For me, I really started to recognize who I could be as a person, and I think maybe because of the intensity of time that I was like, I've got to be this person so quick, and so that ability for me to kind of manage myself wasn't really fully developed yet. I definitely remember feeling that like emotional toll, and I imagine you feel it too in a lot of ways, especially at the beginning. Yeah. What you see what these kids go through, and that kind of reality hits, and it's a lot. It's a heavy burden.
It's very heavy. Like for me, I started with my next door neighbor. We kind of talked before we started this podcast. And I'll be honest, being that person for that family, it felt so good, and doing all the fun stuff, the surprises, the music, the little bit of traveling, right? And then so when we go and pick the next kid to help, same thing, just this unbelievable bond. We're just part of the family. And that kid ended up passing away. And I'll never forget what that felt like. We get so close to these families. We're in the hospital room with her 24 hours before they pulled the plug. And it just hit me like, man, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for like the surprises and the games and the
good bits,
the good stuff. But then, after that time passed and I reflected on it, it was like, that's the bad stuff, but that's the stuff that really means a lot to these families, and means a lot to me that I wasn't just a surprise guy. I was there again in those final moments, and was trusted with the duties I had during those times, and the relationships we have today. Like her mom and I still, when we talk to each other, we say, I love you. That's not something I just say to all the homies every day for no reason, Some of them, for sure.
I was going to say, you got to tell the homies you love them sometimes.
Yeah. But really, just random people. That's not a word I throw around lightly. And me and this family, amongst many others, really love each other. And that's the most beautiful thing that I've gotten out of this. Not going through the cancer world personally, just being an outsider looking in and doing what I can. It's definitely a different connection than people that have gone through it, but it's still something that I hold really true to my heart.
I think it's awesome, because I think, like you said, it's a little bit easier to be there for the sunshine and rainbows, but when it comes down to the tough bits, the reality, and from the cancer perspective, that's the stuff you remember. When I think about all my friends and people I love about, I think about who was there for me when shit got ugly, when it wasn't pretty to look at, and like those people. I feel so, my cup is so full, and I'd take a bullet for them. I would do everything I can, because like you said, you become family.
Yep.
And it's as deep as it gets.
So true. And with that being said, it's no secret that you've gone through this 4 times now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're still saying it with this positive, this optimistic voice.
Well, I laugh because I'm kind of surprised, to be honest.
Yeah. So, man, what is that mentally like? Did you finish treatment the first time? Was it like a
Oh, there's
Were
a
you
break.
done?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're like, you're good to go.
Wow.
Yeah. And my leukemia was acute myeloid leukemia. So typically the treatment is a lot more intense, but it's typically shorter than something like acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And so I think my initial treatment for the first time was about 6 months. It was pretty heavy duty chemo. And I was like, oh my goodness, that was awful. Obviously there was good bits. It was tough. I grew a lot. And then, they told me that I was done. And then I remember that one of the hardest times was definitely coming out of the first. People so much of the time think about the physical treatment, going through it, but some of the hardest parts was honestly the aftermath, the psychologically putting yourself back together. And so after the first time, I remember going back to college. I had my hair, I looked the same, I sounded the same, and then yet my mindset completely shattered in terms of, I learned about history, and then I really kind of got my own slice of understanding what the real world was about. And it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. And so then the person who I used to be and the person who I was beginning to be started kind of pulling at each other. And so, you have your habits, your neural pathways in your brain, things you do when you're sad. And I noticed, again, them pulling away from me. Sometimes the person I was striving towards and sometimes regressing a little bit into the person who I was. And, I felt it. I knew that I had a responsibility because of what I've been through, and I had to trust in what I'd been through, because obviously, like, not every 19-year-old goes through that. And so that fight to assimilate and to be within my peers and to be accepted and understood versus this is a very real thing that happened to you, and you should learn from that experience and grow, because life is very, very short. And to have those pull was really, really tough. And then I remember I really did have a good amount of depression going back to college. But that, in a lot of ways, pushed me to go further, was to understand that, I was sad because I wasn't aligning with the values that I kind of created in the hospital. And unfortunately for a lot of cancer survivors, because of, some of your cancer peers don't survive, you're sometimes plagued with what's called like survivor's guilt. And that's another tough one to really get your head around. It's just, why did I get to live? And these questions of why me and not this person? What did I do differently? Did I fight harder? Was I just lucky? Am I making the use out of time that they would have? And so those questions were really, really tough. But eventually, with the help of, I think some therapy, one of the biggest things actually that really helped me was psilocybin mushrooms. And that kind of perspective I got from that. And I was actually diagnosed with PTSD at that point, because every time I would actually go to bed, I would start going through the motions of night terrors, thinking I was back in the children's hospital. There was a moment in the children's hospital where essentially, so because of the treatment, kills the fastest developing cells in your body, including obviously the blood, the red blood cells, the white blood cells, but also your platelets, your body's ability to clot. And so in between rounds, I got like sunburn on my lips. And so my lips, when I was going through treatment, kept bleeding for just like a month straight. It was impossible to eat food. And so when I went back to college, and I started having these night terrors where I would go to sleep and I would wake up, quote unquote, when I was still asleep, and I would go to the mirror and I would see myself in the hospital bleeding. And so it was just a trajectory that just wasn't looking good. And then that's when I kind of really found psilocybin, and it gave me that perspective change because of all the things that happened to me. And I use the word like me, what happened to this person, Weston, and how tied I was to the event, and how that event identity and cancer was me. And that's when the psilocybin really kind of opened me up to this idea that, it wasn't about me. It was so much bigger than I could possibly realize, and to overthink it and to get so emotional about it, where the universe didn't really have any qualms with me. And that's what actually got me out of the gate the first time, was that it was almost an ego protection, where I was like, oh, if life did this to me, watch what I'm going to do to life. And I'm going to impose my will, because it was my ego wanting to get control. And it wasn't till I graduated, and it worked for a while, that the anger and that, again, I'm going to take everything away from life, and it pushed me to get a lot. But from the emotion of anger, it's always hiding something. Mm-hmm. And typically it's almost always sadness. I was sad because of what had happened to me, but I hadn't really accepted that. And so I used the anger to push me. I got up to like 180 pounds. I was a beefcake. I got to USC. And it was funny enough, when I relapsed, I felt the healthiest I'd ever been. And yet they were like, it's in your bone marrow, it's in your lumbar, it's in your cerebral spinal fluid, it's everywhere. You're going to need a bone marrow transplant. And that was a huge shock. But I'm a big believer of the universe happens for a reason if you allow it to be. And the lesson that I came out of that one was that I didn't have the control that I thought I had. everybody's grasping for this control over their lives when the reality is we're all kind of flying, we're all kind of jumping out of an airplane, hitting terminal velocity, and we've kind of just accepted it, but we're still falling, and we can steer the sails, but we don't have as much control as we think we have. And so once I started peeling back the expectations I had on my life, everything started to flow a lot more. I didn't have as much control as I did, and that, like the Viktor Frankl, the Man's Search for Meaning book, all I really had was the decision to react to what was happening in my life. But yeah, that was that period. Yeah, psychologically was one of the hardest from first cancer to second, I would say.
Well, especially with the bone marrow transplant, because that's a whole situation in itself, right?
Yeah.
And so you were in isolation.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, for anybody who's obviously had a bone marrow transplant, I've heard of some individuals that have had quite a smooth transplant. I've also heard the complete opposite. I was definitely in the opposite category. The first time, because the chemo regimen I went through, I had like brain seizures for I think about 2 weeks, and that was a side effect from the chemo, and the chemo hadn't even started yet. So I had those seizures, and then I remember having like a day off, and I was like, oh, I don't feel too bad. And then what's called mucositis is when like the inside of your mouth, like your GI tract, starts shedding. And then I had that for like another week and a half, and I was just, when you go to the dentist and you have those funnels in your mouth. Yep. I had like a perma dentist suction thing. Oh, and it's competing, but probably the hardest point of my life so far. I always say that because it's like, the universe keeps surprising me. But it also was another huge blessing, or the way that I interpret it and the way that I chose to tell my story, that, until that point in my life, I was trying to find, in a lot of ways, how can I grow? How can I live an abundant life? My life might be shorter than others. Then, how do I evolve and be the best version of myself? Essentially, as fast as I can, which, again, life's a journey. You should do it that way. But I have found that suffering, in some ways, has been the secret sauce for me growing as an individual, and not by choice. I had to just find out the hard way. And, because of that experience, I found jiu-jitsu 4 or 5 months later. And I didn't tell anybody I had cancer. I didn't tell anybody what I'd been through, and they beat the crap out of me. But it was amazing, because I knew what I was. I knew what my body was able to endure and keep moving forward. And so the trust that I got from that experience of, I'm so much more capable than I could possibly imagine, and what the body can overcome when the mind gives up is just absolutely remarkable. And so and that gift of having gone through the transplant, of being like, I gave up. Physically, I don't know how my body survived, and to see yourself go through that and to have that tool in your back pocket was a huge gift. And I implore people who've gone through transplant and they've really gone through the ringer to interpret it that way, because it can in a lot of ways haunt you, but it can also be such a pillar of strength in your life, and recognizing what you've been through. And it's pretty.
Yeah, no, it's a lot to take in, man. And from that first time you were in the children's hospital, by your second fight, were you in the children's hospital still, or were you in the adult?
I did the first 2 chemo regimens in the children's, and then I got upgraded to the big boys.
So I think you're the first person I've met that has spent time, an abundant amount of time, in the children's hospital as well as the adult hospital.
Yeah.
So was the dynamic just completely different? I'm assuming, they're not coming in with music therapists.
Yeah, I was like, where are the dogs at? Right. I was waiting for someone to bring in a dog or an animal. I was like, oh, we don't get that here. Yeah. And there's something about the nurses that choose to be in pediatrics that's just built different. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think nurses in general are just a special breed, especially in the children's. I remember just some of the nurses looking me in the eyes and being like, you're absolutely fine. You're good. And then there'd be like a month later, they're like, you weren't good at all. But I fully trusted them and that maternal instinct they had. And I think, if you're going to be the type of person who's going to put yourself in pediatrics and to watch kids suffer and yet to be there, it just takes so much strength. And so, the love I have for the nurses of Radies, but also UCSD as well. But there's definitely a difference in terms of the care, in terms of, I think in the pediatrics, they make more of an effort to have a relationship with you and the family, whereas UCSD is a little bit more business.
Yeah, right
to
the point.
Yeah, get out.
Yep.
But I think it's also on the patient to to want to have a relationship with your nurses, because I definitely saw bits of both. And so when I started on the children, having that relationship with the nurses made me feel better. I had someone to talk to and someone who actually kind of cared about me. And so I always felt very grateful to have them. And so that's how the way I'd interact with them. And then I kind of carried that to UCSD, and I had loads of nurses there who were, really caring and really thoughtful. But I also saw, again, some of the patients not being as nice and probably didn't get the same treatment as I did. I think as a rule, just be nice to your nurses.
Yeah, just spread good.
Spread good.
And so obviously the third and the fourth battle, how spread apart were all of your different battles that you had? And when was the last one?
So 2016, 2018, 2020, and then 2021.
Wow.
So the second and third one was leukemia cutis. That's the way it expressed itself. So somehow the leukemia had survived and it infiltrated the skin. Well, on the second one it was the skin. I thought it was, the third and fourth time was leukemia infiltration into the skin. The third time was because it was actually a bruise. I've got a scar on one side of my face. I can't remember which side it is. It's just like a little cut.
Okay.
And because I do jiu-jitsu, I was like, oh, it's just a bruise. Got kneed in the face. And yet the bruise just wouldn't go away, and it became more ominous. And I was like, damn, this looks bad. And then I pushed my oncologist to send me to the dermatologist. And what was crazy is as soon as the dermatologist saw me, he's like, yep, that's cancer.
You just knew right away.
Yeah, he was just like that. And I was like, damn, I think I could have avoided something. And then I went through, I always call it the pussy treatment, which is like azacitidine and venetoclax, but it's not really pussy. In comparison to what I've been through, it wasn't intravenous, so I was like, okay, it's not too bad. So that was in 2020, and I was so lucky because I was able to do that. I was able to graduate college during a worldwide pandemic.
Wow. And
so it all kind of came together, and I was like, this went pretty good for me. And I remember my GPA actually went up.
Yeah.
I remember taking like a stress management class, and I loved the fact that I could be like, stress management. They were like, what stresses do you have? And I was like, I have cancer during a worldwide pandemic. And they're like, give this guy an A+.
Yeah, there you go.
My GPA went
use
flying
it.
up. Yeah, you definitely got to use the cancer card when you can. I highly recommend it. It's you got to give some, you got to get some.
Yeah.
And then the fourth time, 2021, that was during the jiu-jitsu competition. That's when I was teaching jiu-jitsu, teaching kids jiu-jitsu, working on my company, and that was again similar bruise. It was actually on my, I don't know if you can see it. It's on my socks. See that like little dark patch?
Yep.
That's what it was. It just looked like a bruise, and it just got more ominous. And I was like, God damn it.
Gotta go check it out, and then.
Yeah. And then that's an unknown thing in itself, is like, is this cancer? Is this something? And then it comes back to the intrusive thoughts, finding something in your life that gives you peace from mind. And I implore everybody to do that. Doesn't need to have cancer, but just the human mind is a very fascinating thing. It can be your greatest asset, and it also can be just, something that really becomes a roadblock. Because again, it's this self-protection. It's trying to help you, but it doesn't necessarily always do it the way that you might want it to. So it doesn't have to be jiu-jitsu, but it could be.
Yeah, and it's a great outlet. And so where are you at now with treatment? Are you fully done?
So I'm in remission, but I experienced from time and again of a side effect that happens because of a transplant. So I've had 2 transplants, and on the second one, I got what's called graft versus host disease. So when I was in the actual hospital itself, I got pretty bad gut GVHD. Not pretty.
Oh, man.
That's not even something that... Yeah, it's not as cool as the brain seizures, unfortunately. More just like gut problems,
right.
Which isn't as flashy. And then those stopped. I was on high dose of prednisone steroids, and that's typically the first kind of medication they use because it's inflammation. GVHD, I think I said it's graft versus host disease. Imagine you have a liver transplant. They worry about your body attacking this new organ. But in my case, it's a whole new immune system and a whole new body. And so they worry about the new immune system attacking your body. And so that's kind of what happens. And then so in November, I started getting like mouth, skin, and eyes. And then this high dose of steroids brought it back down. And then most recently, I think it happened after December. So my girlfriend and I took an amazing trip in Costa Rica. It's probably the best trips
Good
of my
place.
life. It's such a cool place. First week, we went traveling around. We saw monkeys. We saw waterfalls. Unbelievable. It only gets better. And the second week, I was doing a jiu-jitsu camp. I was training 4 hours a day. I was in heaven. Still the best trip ever. But here's the but. The last day, I was like, damn, I started to feel really bad. And then everybody who was, especially in the jiu-jitsu camp, started getting like stomach stuff. And so I managed to essentially just scrape back into the US. I was like sitting on my butt through passport control because I was like so tired. So I got back to the US, and then I went to the ER. They had to test my stool. And then I found out I had 2 different strains of E. coli and a parasite. And then the next day I went septic and I got sepsis. And so me and my girlfriend were just in the hospital, and there I am just like fighting for my life. But in my head was like, there's no planet where I survived cancer 4 times and E. coli is the thing that's going to take me out. That ain't happening. And then because of that, this is why I think typically GVHD happens when your immune system is overreacting, and then it's like, okay, we have to kill everything. Because of that such extreme reaction, I got another type of GVHD called essentially muscular GVHD, where it just attacks my muscles.
Wow.
So that's where the thing kind of stops me from doing jiu-jitsu from time to time, because when it revs up, it feels like I ran like a ultra marathon run, and I'm just like, I'm so sore and I've done nothing. It feels very unrewarding. You know, sometimes with the stress, the workout, you're like, I had a good workout, my body feels, but I earned that. I didn't earn any of this. It's like, I'm actually getting smaller.
Man, and with everything that you've gone through, I didn't even know about the E. coli.
I know.
And then a few months ago when we met, I'm pretty sure you were in the hospital for COVID, right?
Oh, yeah.
That
I
one
got
too?
COVID part 2.
Oh, part 2, huh?
Yeah, but this it wasn't that bad. That's the thing, when you get the perspective of it, you're like,
that's
this ain't that bad.
right.
Just a little shit. The most boring thing is just being in the hospital again. But I've found a way to make the most out of it. Yeah, COVID's it's pretty boring. I feel like my sister had it worse.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, stop whining.
Yeah, man, especially after everything you've been through.
But that's another thing is I also got to be careful of is comparing and stuff like that. And, because I always still want to, be able to connect with my friends and
For sure. Yeah.
But sometimes I'll give them a hard time.
Well, I mean, you have the full right to.
Because you have the right, it's like you gotta play it. You gotta play it well. Like when it's comedic, especially in jiu-jitsu, like you're getting beaten by a cancer survivor. How do you feel?
Oh man, but I just keep thinking about the E. coli. To be honest, yeah. No, because I used to look that shit up when I was a kid. When I heard about what that was, I was like, man, that's rough.
I think the lettuce got me, like the water.
So did everybody else in the class? You said everybody else's stomach was flaring up too, right?
Yeah, I think people had it before, but because my immune system was still compromised,
it hits you harder.
Yeah. And then it became, because essentially it goes into your bloodstream, and then your organs start shutting down.
Jeez.
And so they put in like a catheter into my arm and in my neck because my blood pressure was dropping, and then they put the oxygen mask on my face, and it wasn't looking good. But in my head, I was like, there's no planet. There's no planet where this takes me out.
No way.
I honestly think that stubbornness really helped me.
Oh, 100%.
Of just being like, there's just no way. And then just another chapter in my life. And if you'd ask me would I do it again, I'd do it again.
Yep, run it back.
I remember my doctor came back and was just like, I'm not letting you go on trips anymore.
Yeah. You're like, as long as I get to go back to Costa Rica, right?
Man, it was such a good trip.
So good.
Crazy ending.
Yeah. At least it was the last day.
Yeah.
You got back.
The fact that I came back to America was honestly a miracle. Because imagine myself doing treatment in Costa Rica with all my health history. I mean, my health history is just pages and pages. And with the transplant and with all these different stuff, it's really important that you have, your doctor just knows what you've gone through.
100%.
It was super lucky.
Wild. And with everything you've gone through medically, I know we were talking before the podcast, just so inspired by how much good you've spread. I know you have a roster of accomplishments, but the most recent one that we were all so impressed by is you raised $300,000 for LLS. So first of all, congratulations on being the Visionary of the Year.
Thank you.
But how the fuck did you do it? $300,000.
I know.
Some okay, when we started our nonprofit, I think that took us like 4 or 5 years to get to that. Like you did that in what, 8 weeks?
10 weeks.
10 weeks, man. So
the story behind why I picked 300,000 is because I accidentally went online and I looked at the, like the ballers.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm gonna do that. But I accidentally looked nationally, and I didn't look at San Diego, so I didn't actually know how deep I was in it until all the candidates would come together and they were like, "Oh, we've got a San Diego goal of $800,000. And I was like, you're telling me that I just said to everybody that I'm going to try and do like half of that? And I think that's something I do to myself a lot, is I kind of just throw myself into the deep water, and I was in the deep water for sure. And I remember everybody looking at me like, do you realize how much money that is? And I don't think I did. I think I kind of knew. And then it was just a matter of, okay, well, I can't be seen as a liar. I mean, as a combination of that, there was so many good motivators for it that I had everything. I had the whys for, why I was doing it, for people like myself, people like Dylan with blood cancers. And that was such a strong motivator. And then I had the why of, again, I don't want to look like a liar. And that entrepreneurship, trying to figure out the problem, of figuring out kind of ways around roadblocks and obstacles and bottlenecks. And it had so much task variety to it, where I just had so much fun. I mean, it was exhausting, but it was so much fun. And we looked through every single avenue. We obviously reached out to you guys for the merchandise. Yeah, very good.
Right here.
It's beautiful. I'll give you a little.
There you go. Turn around
yep.
There it is.
Very clean. Very clean. Even after we finished, we had more people coming to ask about them. Merchandise, jiu-jitsu events. We took over a nightclub. What was another fun one? We reached out to people on OnlyFans. I mean, we went through like every single possible avenue in terms of raising money. And then again, like high-profile individuals. We had like a $25,000 donation for the founders of like Cutwater. Yeah. I mean, what was one of the greatest things about that is just how many people that we reached and talked to, and how many people have connections to blood cancer, and this beautiful thing that humans are so much more giving than we give them credit to. Mm-hmm. This idea of reciprocity, and I think sometimes people struggle with the idea of asking because it's like a taking thing. But how I'd really seen it at the beginning of the campaign, I think that's what separated me, was that I didn't think of it as an ask. I thought I was giving something back, that intrinsic value. And we spoke about it a little bit before the podcast about how important it is to have that purpose and meaning in your life, and how much fuller it makes your life. And so when I was asking people, it just didn't feel like an ask. It felt like that intrinsic value. It was like, I'm only going to make your life better by taking your money.
That's huge. And had you ever done a campaign like this before?
Nope.
See, and I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, like for me, I thought I was going to be a pro baseball player or, the next Justin Bieber or whatever it is, right? There's just no limits. And I think, especially like when you work in the world of giving, especially once it becomes a business.
Yeah.
It goes back into that mindset. It's like, oh, it's an ask.
Yeah.
I'm asking of somebody's pocketbook for just another project.
Yeah.
But I love talking to people that do their first campaign,
and
then you really just crushed it because there's no limit. There's no roof.
Yeah.
You accidentally said 300,000, so you're going to do it. I guarantee if you said 500, you probably would have done that too.
Oh, like it's 500 sounds wild. But looking back,
I mean, 300's wild, man. Like like I said, I know people that raise a lot of money. But 310 weeks, that's fire.
I think we made it by like $80.
That's the beauty of it, though. That's what I'm saying is even if the goal was higher, it's just getting there. And so did you have a team of friends and family? How did they all work?
I think that was another big portion of it. We had a team of 40 people.
Okay.
And we had them both in England and the US. And so managing the time, the different people, the different personalities was a big one. And I think that's definitely kind of put into my wheelhouse, my skill set, was I really just love people. I love understanding how people work. I love what motivates people. And so I really took the time to understand my friends and get to know them a little bit better. And the campaign was always second. Our friendship was always first. And I always wanted to make that clear, because I understand people had their own times, their own problems, their work, their own lives. And that's something that I had to always check myself with, because as well I was on like high doses of, I think that was also a secret sauce because of my GVHD, and they put me on steroids, and so it was like fluctuating of the intensity. And so when I was on like 60 milligrams, I was like, we're going. Everybody was like going through a little bit of a break, and I was like, we'll sleep when we're dead.
I love it.
So I think that was maybe like a performance enhancing drug in some ways, but it was so much fun. Now I'm hoping to apply for a job that would again, kind of like motivate people to do the same thing and be in that position. And I think the people you meet and as an experience, and like I said earlier, doing things that are hard and doing things that are uncomfortable are just the things that you remember. And you look at your life and you put it in like a little chapter book. It's such a fun chapter. and we had the big. It's funny because we had the gala, which when we found out, and as soon as like I found out I won, my energy levels just plummeted. Like everyone's like woo, and I'm just like falling asleep at the table. I'm like I got nothing left, and yeah, just to know that I gave it everything I got. And I remember going into that not knowing if we'd won, but we won by a decent amount. But the biggest thing was not being a liar. It was that I said something and I did it, and that was one of the greatest feelings ever. And I even still now, like I haven't fully processed it, but I can't wait to in a couple of years to look back at it and being like, yeah, just proud. And I think that comes back to, we said sometimes about the self-critic and stuff like that. I have actually kind of a hard time taking like the pats on the back kind of thing. So that's something I'm really trying to focus on more in the future, is like, yeah, just being like, that was really good. So sometimes I actually forget, and when people tell me about it, it kind of refreshes that, you know, that wasn't just a easy thing, you know.
It's pretty big, dude. Yeah, and that's why even on our side, when you reached out to partner, make some merchandise, we were super excited about it. I was actually at the LS Gala last year.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, to be able to be part of it again, I was like, let's do this. And I think we helped raise $2,000-3,000. And we were like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then we matched it too.
Yeah,
we matched it too.
exactly.
I think that was one of the biggest biggest plays that I was just, every bit of money we raised, I would find somebody that worked in a corporation or a company that did matching donations. And so I'd hunt for like 1-to-1s, 2-to-1s, you know, anywhere up to like 15,000 where they would literally match it.
That's huge.
That's just, I would say, just such a good way to go about it. I mean, yeah, free money, essentially. No. I mean, but again, finding someone you trust to give them the money.
You're going to give them $3,000 and hope it works
like, where did that money go?
Yeah, well, especially because some of the matching, it takes a month or it'll take some time. So to make sure that comes back. But yeah, when we made that donation, I honestly thought, I didn't know you. I really didn't know much about you other than you're doing this great thing that I was part of last year. So I was like, oh, it's probably going to raise like $50,000, which is huge.
Yeah.
And then I saw your video, $300,000. I was like, whoa, we were like a tiny little piece of that campaign.
But a very important part. You know, think about, like, you think about $80. So I think we're over by $80. So every bit, like, was the accumulation of every little bit and every hard work and every person we reached out to was the reason.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
So I'm very, very grateful.
Awesome.
And I mean, again, they're so cool.
It's a sick shirt.
All my friends still wore it. And then when we did like the nightclub, we had a bunch of us wearing it. Like, it was such a cool memory.
We might have to relaunch that.
Yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
I like that. And I also saw that you have your own company. I know you mentioned a little bit of entrepreneurship.
Yep.
Tell us a little more.
So the company's called Water Shield. It's a moisture barrier company aimed to improve the lives of cancer patients with central lines. So if you have specifically like Hickman lives, or they're called Broviacs, or the inline portacats, when you go through showering, or you go through treatment, showering is something that's really kind of overlooked. And I'm definitely not the smartest person in the world, so I'm not going to be the guy that's going to, I'm not going to be curing cancer. But I really, especially when I went back to school, when I went to USC, and I was really interested in business, you know, they tell you from the get-go, you know, you want to find a problem that people would be willing and able to pay for, and so you should look to your personal experiences. And at that point, pretty much most of my personal experience was cancer, and I noticed that there were so many little incremental improvements within treatment that had resulted in helping a lot of lives, but also making a lot of money. I also knew that it was going to give me an A in my business class, and so I kind of like started touching upon it. I proposed this solution. It says all the current competitors use these like chemical-based adhesives, kind of like a Band-Aid. And so as you can imagine, in like a hot shower condition, it's going to immediately make the chemical adhesive weaker and start peeling off. And so I came up with the concept, putting it through classes. It all looked good. The business was there in terms of the, you know, like the time, SAM, the market analysis, and the business model canvas looked really good, but there was no real solution for it yet. And like, I'm going to be kind of careful how we talk about it because of patent reasons, but essentially we didn't use a chemical adhesive. I went to the biomedical engineering school, biomedical engineering school at USC, and yeah, we came up with some, I'm not going to say I did, the engineers who are incredibly smart people just came up with this new solution, not using chemical, looking to nature, bio-inspired adhesives. And I think I can say it like that. And yeah, so, and that's been a really slow process. You know, I wanted entrepreneurship to be this fast thing, but it's been quite slow, but it's something that could impact a lot of lives. These water bloodstream infections cost about like $46,000 to treat. And because they're preventable hospital-acquired infections, like Medicare insurance companies don't cover them. So the hospital just eats it. And then from the patient's point of view, I mean, these infections can, you can result in you dying. Excess hospital days. And from my own perspective, when I showered, I'd put music on, I would dance and be a little silly goose, and I was more likely to eat a little bit more likely to walk around the hospital, doing laps and stuff. And yeah, so hopefully within this next 6 months to a year, we'll have our finished MVP. And then because of the technology we're doing, there's just so many more applications we can do. But I have a cutoff point. I think my area of focus is really starting off at pediatrics and then going to oncology, and then there's just a very big ocean of different areas like wound care, colostomy bags.
So many opportunities.
Yeah, for just like moisture coverings. But then I want to eventually, I don't know, do more jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that would be really cool, but that's a tough sell. It's like, how do I, you've just suffered all this. What's the best thing for you? More suffering.
Yeah.
But maybe, the idea of cuddles and stuff like that. And also because of like physical connection, because you're not allowed to touch someone, the struggle cuddles is just another good one. But finding a balance, I think that's the key. Water shield, hopefully look out for more, especially the next 6 months or a year. Me wearing suits, hiding my tattoos, trying to look professional.
No, man, keep doing you, bro. So are you currently fundraising for that too, or do you have funding, or how does that work?
I have to be very careful about that in terms of not talking about it, but but about how I approach it. It would actually be pretty easy to get the funding for something like this. As you can imagine, so many people related to blood cancer, so many people that feel passionate about it. But the problem is, because I work with USC takes like 60% of the overhead. Like that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And so the way that I've been going about it is going for grants, like SBIR, SDTR grants, and they actually cover a lot of the overhead. And so I think that's all the overhead in a lot of cases. And so that's why it's been partly so slow, is because if I'm going to do it, I want to do it right, and not make light out of the money that people,
it's a different strategy.
Yeah, and especially with those large investors. Funds, because it's not a donation. They want they want that ROI. Yep. That when we do take the money, that we're going to have a track and a direction and a game plan where it really can return their investment on a big way. But at this stages right now, I think it would be a lot smarter to not dilute the company, not dilute the equity, and stay with that close connection with USC, and without having people to answer to every week, and they're like, where's the MVP at? And I was like, it was kind of the same where it was last week. This is in terms of the technology we're using, in terms of the time, energy, and expertise it takes. Like it's got to be slow, and it's got to be done right. But yeah, still always excited for it. It's been testing, but we won like a $50,000 competition at this biomedical engineering competition at USC called the MEPC Engineering Prize Competition, and then we won the Stevens Showcase one, and we're like a new venture seed finalist. So everybody wants to succeed, and I'm hopefully just going to be in that driver's seat to keep pushing it along, because I'm going to do it as long as I can until something comes of it. And if nothing comes of it, no expectations, but I'll find another way to give. And that's the secret sauce, which I feel like I've said that like 5 times.
No, I mean, you're living the spread good lifestyle. So it's very, very cool to hear. Beyond inspired by you, man. I can't thank you enough for coming out and sharing some of your perspective, your story. I know that you've helped so many people directly, indirectly, and just through just the way you speak and motivate. I know it's going to keep touching people.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So thank you so much again for being here. It's been a fun time. I have a feeling we'll probably run this back sometime, maybe on the jiu-jitsu mat.
Definitely. I got mats at home.
Okay, so this will definitely happen. So let's have some fun. 100 likes, we'll relaunch Weston's shirt. 500 likes on this video. We'll launch a live of me and Weston rolling around.
I'll bring the mats for sure.
Love it, love it. But if you guys like this podcast, be sure to follow Weston on Instagram. We'll drop his stuff right here. And then also, as you know, please continue to like, share, comment, subscribe. And Nick's not here, so I'll say hit the bell button. And until next time, take shots, talk shit.
Spread good. Cheers.